Hello people of the internet, I come to you today wearing a bed sheet. That's right, this was a bed sheet. This is a little note from Sophie at the end of the video. The bed sheet shirt I'm wearing in this intro was the first prototype. During this tutorial video I am sewing the one I'm wearing now, which is exactly how the pattern, the printable pattern you're using, if you are using it, will look. I made a few changes since the one I'm wearing in this video, and I want to make sure you know exactly what you're getting if you decide to print out the pattern and so on. I got another bed sheet from an estate sale. It's this really cute blue floral pattern, so we're also in a heat wave, so I need another cute little summer top. So I'm going to sew this into one of these so that I can teach you guys how to make it today. You can also download the printable pattern for this shirt if you want to make it yourself. It is sized for my body, size medium or an 8 US. I'm hoping, if you're not my exact size, that you'll be able to kind of adjust the pattern to your body type. This fabric is kind of thin. I think this one was too. So I did a double layer and I noticed that I can see the pattern coming through from the other side. What I'm gonna do for this one is I'm gonna cut out the front pieces from my pattern, and I'm gonna cut out the lining pieces from a second bed sheet that I got that is just white and a little bit thicker. I pour my heart and soul into these tutorials. If you wanna support my channel, if you wanna see more videos like this, send me a subscribe, like the video, it would really help. In order to make the one shoulder tie top, you are going to add the darts to the outer front, add the darts to the lining front, sew the two ties, sew the darted outer front to the back. Hi, Nicholas. Sew the darted lining front to the lining back, baste the ties to the wrong side of the lining, and then sew the lining and outer shells together, right side to right side. Sew the eyelets and thread the straps through. Add the elastic and attach the strap, and finish off the bottom. To make this Stitchmaster tie top, you're gonna take the front piece and make the darts. Make a little hole at the tip of each of these triangles. And mark through the holes with either marking pencil or marking pen so that your mark shows up on the fabric. I like to just double check that those went through and sometimes darken up the mark. And then we go through and we're gonna mark at the end of these triangles. Right here and right here. What we're gonna do here is iron. I usually pinch it at the dot and then I pinch it so that these two line up. This is a really small one, so it's gonna be kind of difficult. Press that. And then pin it. And so you can see the purple still coming through where I drew the line, and that's what we're gonna sew. And we're gonna do that process for each of the 4 darts. You're gonna take the top front lining piece and make the same darts so that the strap goes in the opposite direction. Now that we have added the darts to the outer shell and the lining of the front piece of the shirt, we're then going to take the 2 pieces of fabric that we cut out for the ties, and we are going to fold them in half right side to right side, press, and then sew along the top edge and the long edge, leaving the bottom open. And we're gonna sew that at the width of the seam allowance, which we're doing a 1/2 inch seam allowance for this shirt. So this is the sewn end. I'm gonna cut this corner so that, but not too close because you don't want it to fall through. So I cut it to about 2 centimeters away from the sewed line. And I'm gonna thin out this one on the top, and that way when I pull it through, this corner will fold in on itself a little bit more sharply. So now that I have this corner trimmed, I kind of put this here and just try to fold the fabric over this so that the popsicle stick starts to go into the tube. Sorry, popsicle stick, chopstick. And then you kind of want to push out the corner as much as you can. And then to finish off these ties, you're just gonna want to press them. Okay, so now that we have our 2 front ties finished, the next step is to set those aside and return to the 2 front pieces that we had put our darts into. We want to take the back pieces, so you're going to put the outer back piece with the outer front piece and the lining back piece with the lining front piece. And you're going to sew both right side to right side to create the 2 shirt loops. Before we sew the lining to the shirt, we are going to baste the ties onto the lining. Now I get confused. What was I doing? These ties want to be sandwiched in between the lining and the outer shell. So we know that the outside of this lining is going to be towards the body. So we want to baste our ties into the wrong side of the shell. So I'm going to flip it and I'm going to get my pattern. So we know this is the wrong side because you can see the darts and you can see your seam here is not the finished seam, it's the raw edge. Put the pattern on top, line it up from the bottom, and mark right where these dotted lines come out. Do the same on the other side, line it up from the bottom, mark here where the dotted lines come out. At the end of the shirt, the ties are going to come to the front and tie here. But right now, we want to baste them on going the other direction. So we're going to put the tie here so it's right in between those marks that we just made. And we're going to baste it right onto the seam. That was professional form there. So now that we have the ties sewn on, we're going to want to sew the outer shirt to the shirt lining, right side to right side, leaving spaces where we're going to add in the strap. So I actually only leave the space here to slide the strap in, and then I just sew it onto the back so that I can fit it later. So since this is the right side and this is the right side, we're going to just slide this in here. And we're going to start pinning with a double pin here to remind ourselves to leave this open. I want to make sure that these are hanging down and do not get sewn into the thingy because that would be bad. I'm going to start at one side of the top where we're not closing it because that's just easiest. It's looking pretty good so far. I feel good about this. When I made the previous shirt, it was like probably 2 years ago, and I made a digital version of the pattern. Main focus, good old handy chopstick. So I dug up this old pattern, threw it in Adobe Illustrator, made some changes to it based on what I'd noticed with the other top, and so I actually don't know how this is going to turn out. I'm only going to include that in the video if it turns out good. If it turns out bad, you will never see this video. Hello? That's what we have so far. I would highly recommend right now doing a test to see. I can easily get this over my head, which means once the elastic's in, I'll still be able to get it over my head. Now, before I attach the strap to the top, I realized I want to, I don't remember what this is called. I'm probably gonna look it up after and put it on the screen. But I think it's called top stitching. Basically, I've sewn this whole shirt right side to right side, but I wanna make sure that it doesn't like slip around, that it kind of stays where the lining is hidden and the fabric I want on the outside stays on the outside. So I'm gonna go through and I'm gonna go through sewing a second line that pins the seam of the lining and the outer shell down by sewing about 1 centimeter or 2 away from the original seam on the side of the lining. Shoot, dang it. I think I'm gonna need to sew a new shoulder strap, and I don't know if I have it in me to do that right now. I have fixed the strap, and if you are using the pattern to sew along from home, it will be fixed on the one that you're using. We're going to fold the top of this shoulder strap inwards about the 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I'll take the strap that I sewed, and you can put it either way depending on where you want the seam to be. I like the seam to be inward towards my neck, and it works out because I like how the patterns match up here. So I'm going to take this raw edge of the strap and slide it into the pocket that I just created. And again, keep your chopstick nearby. It helps a lot with these fine details. You can also use a safety pin attached to the end to help you feed it through, and then just take the safety pin out this way later. It'll look like this, and then you're just going to sew one line across there to seal it all in. I just sewed that on. You can align this up by the bottom, and you can see where you're working from because the darts should line up with these 2 lines, and through the holes you rip in these 2 tie markings, you're just gonna draw these in there. And you only need to mark these on the outer piece, the front piece, because the eyelets only go on the front. It's okay if the buttonhole is slightly narrower than the full width of the tie, because the tie is flat, so when it scrunches up it'll still be able to fit through, and that actually looks better because it makes it look more like a tie. We just don't want it to be longer than this sleeve, because then it'll get into these seams and it won't look as good as it can. Okay, so on that test, I got a buttonhole that's the perfect width, and then the final test is to see if the tie fits through and if I like how it looks. It does, and I like it. So I'm now gonna sew those 2 buttonholes onto the shirt, right where I marked the shirt. There we go. Now that we have the tie finished in the front, we're not going to sew the casing for the tie yet. That's going to be after we deal with the elastic that we're going to put in the back. But you do want to thread the ties through so that they're not so tight that they're bunching the lining, and then just tie them so that they're out of the way for now. Okay, I've acquired elastic. This is a 3-inch knit elastic. I'm gonna cut a piece that is just kind of the size from side to side of my back. We're gonna need less than that because it has to, we want it to be stretched when it's on. But I figure this is the easiest way to waste as little elastic as possible. Because if I were to just cut it as big as the sleeve is, we'd waste a lot of elastic. Stretch out. Excuse me, mister. This is not the Nicholas show, mister. The next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna sew the casing for the elastic on the back. So you'll see more dotted lines on the back pattern piece where the elastic goes. So you want to have this lined up. I'm going to also pin the other side so that when we get there, we know for sure it's lined up properly. You want to align the dotted line with the top because this part is within, no, let's go back a bit. And then mark where the second dotted line is. So we're going to sew one line that is 1/2 inch down. And then you can just use the 1/2 inch guide on your sewing machine. And once we've sewn that top line, I am going to mark off the bottom line because there's no 3-inch guide on the sewing machine. So I'm going to take this. It's a little difficult because the tie, I'm going to actually untie the front for now because it's too lumpy. There we go. And then I'm going to repin the sides where I want to make sure the seams align. And then we sew. Okay. So now we have our elastic sleeve sewn into the back of the shirt. And we are going to now work on adding the elastic in. We're going to do this just like we would do any other elastic. We're going to put a safety pin on one end. And we're gonna feed it through this loop. That is a really nice snug fit. I'm very happy with that. We're gonna pull it just far enough through so that the elastic lines up with the seam. And then we're gonna sew down one end of the elastic and then we're gonna pull through the other end of the elastic to fit. Okay, I have put the shirt on and pinned the strap and the elastic to where it fits comfortably. I have it safety pinned on this side, so I was able to just pull it through until I got it where I wanted it. And then I pinned the strap on the back again, so I got it where I want it. I had to get my sister to help me. But I'm so happy with it. I haven't even sewn the casing on the front yet, and I kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of an interesting style where it doesn't actually have the casing, it just, the tie comes out. I don't know. I'm just going to sew one stitch right here to lock in the elastic, and then I'm gonna sew the strap onto the back. I started off by removing the safety pin that was holding in the elastic to where I wanted it, then pinned it, and now just sewing a line of stitches to lock it in. So here I have the strap pinned where I had tried it out, and I'm going to cut off the extra. So I'm going to zigzag stitch the end of this so that it doesn't fray, press it about a 1/2 inch in, and then baste it as close as I can get to this seam that's already here but without... Oh, I'm also going to measure this to make sure that now that the elastic's in here that we're at the halfway mark, because I want it to be even. Wow, that's crazy. That's exactly the halfway mark. Okay, I'm very impressed with myself. My mic malfunctioned in and out for the last few pieces of this tutorial, so sometimes the audio will be matching up with the video, and sometimes I'm gonna have to add in a voiceover like I'm doing right now, so I apologize, but that's why things might sound a little weird. Alright, let's keep going. So in order to mark off where we want to sew the top of the tie sleeve for the front of the shirt, you're gonna measure from the dotted line in the kind of underarm there to the dotted line where we want to sew the top of the sleeve. And then you're going to mark that distance from the top on the side seam, as I'm doing here. Once you make this mark, you're gonna flip the shirt to the other side and make a mark the same distance down. And then you're going to measure up from the bottom of the pattern, the actual bottom of the pattern, because we haven't finished the bottom of the shirt, so we don't need to account for seam allowance, which the dotted line is where the seam is, the edge is where the raw edge of the fabric is. Then once we have these 3 marks in place, we're going to connect them with fabric marking pen or pencil. It's really important that we're using fabric marking pen or pencil, as this is the very front of the shirt and it is necessary that the marks will come off once we're done. And once we have this line drawn, we're going to make sure that the ties themselves are out of the way, and we're going to sew this line down across the front of the shirt, making sure that the fabric is laid smooth so that the outer front of the shirt and the lining of the shirt aren't getting caught in any weird way, that they're lying flat against each other. Alright, so now that we have the top seam of the front tie casing sewn, we're gonna take those ties back out and thread them through the eyelets in the front. And then go through and pin the bottom of the tie casing shut below where each tie ends. And this is a little bit of a tricky step. You have to really kind of finagle the fabric, so I usually start by getting everything as flat as I can and making sure that the tie is pulled taut but not so tight that it's scrunching the fabric. And then with the lining flat, I'll open up the top, push it as close to the seam as possible, lay it back down, and then go through and pin. And once we have that casing pinned down, we're going to sew just below where that tie is so that we have a snug fit, but we're not catching the tie in the seam. So if we catch the tie in the seam, then it won't scrunch, and we want that scrunch look for the front. So once we finish pinning this, we're just gonna sew that bottom seam, and we'll have the tie casing finished. And once you finish, you can do a quick little test to see if it worked out by pulling the ties. And if they pull well and don't catch, it means that you didn't catch the tie in your seam. Something that I forgot to mention that I did when I was making this shirt is I cut out the pattern pieces so that the already sealed end of the bed sheet is the bottom of the shirt. So I actually think I'm gonna leave it like that on the outside, but I do want to finish the lining. So I'm gonna fold the lining in at 1/2 inch, sew it to finish the lining, and then we're gonna be done. And we're gonna have a fabulous shirt. We did it, we are done. If all has gone well, you now have your very own Stitch Master one shoulder tie front top. Yes, I am very literal with my pattern naming. Yes, I will work on it. I would love to see what you guys make. If you ever are super excited about a craft and you want to share it with me, my Instagram is @StitchmasterMurray, and please DM me. Also, if you have any feedback about the tutorial itself or the pattern or access to the printable pattern, I'm always trying to do better and make these as useful as possible, so please leave me a comment. I pour my heart and soul into these tutorials. This pattern itself was about 2 years in the making, and it took me like 3 weeks just to film and edit the actual video portion. So if you want to support my channel, if you want to see more videos like this, send me a subscribe, like the video. It would really help me to grow my channel and hopefully one day be able to spend more of my time doing this. So thanks for watching. I'll see you next time, people of the internet.